You're listening to the Career Interrupted podcast. This is your host, Joy Foster. Welcome to the podcast, Napala, who's the founder of Habitual, a company that has been helping people lose weight and reverse type 2 diabetes for the past 5 years. I am really looking forward to this conversation because, of course, there is a huge impact on people who are overweight in the workforce. And I want to talk about that with you in particular. But before we get into that, Napala, tell us a little bit about Habitual, why you started it, and give us a bit of background before we dive into this deeper conversation around how weight affects careers.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So, yeah, we started Habitual about 5 years ago. I met my co-founder doing research into type 2 diabetes and specifically helping patients lose weight to be able to reverse type 2 diabetes. There were some amazing research trials that were done. They were doing kind of one-to-one behavioral coaching with a low-calorie diet plan. And we saw really an opportunity to take the one-to-one behavioral coaching into a digital format and really be able to scale that to many more people than you could ever do with a kind of face-to-face one-to-one model. So that was our kind of original offering, was a digital type 2 diabetes reversal program. Call that our flagship, if you will. And it wasn't necessarily, I think we kind of started focused on type 2 diabetes because that's where the exciting research was. But at the end of the day, what we were building out was a behavior change intervention designed to go alongside any sort of weight loss intervention. And so weight loss medications obviously came to the world. Well, I mean, they've been around for quite a bit longer, but rocked the world, if you will, a few years ago. And we've been really seeing how that's changing kind of the world we live in many ways, which has been interesting to be a part of. But for us, it was a really natural progression of our offering. So we added on a weight loss medication to go again alongside our behavior change program to help patients lose weight and then hopefully change their habits to be able to keep it off over time. So yeah, I guess now what we're excited about is really continuing to build out the holistic offering. If you look at, especially in the UK, if you look at the kind of people offering weight loss medications, it's primarily online pharmacies that are just selling a medication and letting patients get on with it themselves. And there is a time and a place for that, of course. But what we really want to do is help people address the holistic sort of picture that is sleep, exercise, nutrition, mental health. And so we want to put all of that into kind of one wrapper under the Habitual umbrella. So that's what we're excited about building out and helping patients with as we look ahead.
Wow. Well, let's talk about how weight affects careers because that you have some stats for us that you'd like to share. And I think it's really important to understand the context of the impact that weight gain has on someone's career.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we there's kind of the personal level and then there's the kind of population level, and those are obviously two kind of interlinked things. There are a couple points I would make, one around the gender side of things and then one around just generally kind of weight in the workplace. There is data to show that people that suffer with obesity or excess weight generally are at a higher risk of long-term and short-term sick leave. So when you think about the ability to progress a career, of course, if you're off work for a kind of sickness purposes, whether that is related to obesity or not, that is obviously detrimental. But the sad reality is that anyone who's kind of carrying around excess weight, and particularly if it's a significant amount of excess weight, you are at an elevated risk of other sort of conditions related to that. And unfortunately, that means that you might be off work for more time than you would be otherwise, which from a career progression perspective is of course not amazing. And then obviously there's the personal element to that, like nobody wants to be off sick, of course. And then there's some really interesting research around sort of gender and obesity in the workplace. So the data seems to suggest that men can kind of get away with it from a career progression perspective, whereas women tend to get overlooked. And I'm just going to pull up this paper that I was just looking at because it's quite sad, actually, how they kind of phrase it. Research suggests that employers tend to evaluate larger women as less productive and less desirable, lacking in self-discipline, professionalism, and having lower supervisory potential, right? So that is one, like all of those things, just because you walk into a room and you're struggling with your weight, right? And of course, this is again on a population level. So everyone is different. And there will certainly be examples of people who have incredible careers and have a bit of excess weight that they're carrying around. So it's not to say that it's not possible, but generally from a population perspective, it tends to be quite detrimental in terms of both salary and career progression, which is super unfortunate. And again, one of these things that seems to be different between genders as well. So, we're all out there fighting.
Well, that is really interesting because one of the things that we're out, fighting for TechPixies is gender equality in the workplace. And, so what you've just said is statistically, it's even harder. It's harder for a woman in the workplace anyway, but it's even harder for a woman who's overweight in the workplace. That's effectively what that study is just showing us. It is it's so important we talk about this. It's really important for women to hear this because that should hopefully be something that would help someone say, I want to change, be motivated to change. Now, it's really interesting because we were doing a little bit of a pre-chat. I asked you if you had any examples of people that you were working with where things have changed for them as a result career-wise. And you had some really interesting things to say. So share that with our audience because I'm sure they would love to hear some of the success stories. And it wasn't what I
Yeah,
was expecting.
yeah, me neither. So I guess generally what we do see is that when somebody loses kind of 15 to 20% of their body weight, which is what we see on average, they tend to feel significantly more confident. How they show up both in the workplace and at home improves. So, there's this whole kind of psychological aspect, which obviously translates to the workplace. The one that I think you're talking about is we work with a lot of kind of micro influencers and content creators on weight loss medications, but also around our other products and services that we offer. And one that we've been with for probably over a year now, kind of started with a few hundred, maybe TikTok followers. And she recently told us that she's quit her job and she's become a full-time content creator because the opportunities that it's presented to her in terms of brand partnerships, sponsorships, etc. She's like a star creator on TikTok now. And this is with, I think, I don't know, in the tens of thousands of followers, right? So this is she's not like famous in the traditional sense, right? But it's enough to build an entire career that more than compensates for her previous full-time job, which I think is a really incredible kind of example of how a weight loss journey can totally transform somebody's life.
I think that's such a unique story, especially since, at TechPixies, we teach social media and a lot of the women that we work with are wanting to take off their invisibility cloak, become more visible online. And of course, if you don't feel good in yourself, it's hard to take off that invisibility cloak, like even harder. I we have a lot of amazing people in our community, and I have a couple people in particular who are very interested in overeating and the effects of overeating and the emotional side of overeating. And really, I asked them, if you could ask Napala any questions, what would they be? And they pretty much came back with the same question. And that question was, is taking medication a bypass for doing the emotional work?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think some of the kind of more negative narratives in the media that we'll see around the medication, or maybe not negative, but it is kind of being held as this silver bullet, right? Which is actually quite dangerous because no medication is going to do the work to really change your habits and your relationship with food. So if I kind of rewind back to where we came from, again, it was around helping people really make holistic habit change and then to sustain that over time. So what we see is that weight loss medications can be a really powerful tool to unlock this kind of mental clarity. And for the first time, for many people to be able to stop just like the food chatter that's going on 24/7. And that opens up this really amazing opportunity for someone to actually be able to do that deeper work. So, certainly not a substitute, but if you are constantly struggling with your relationship with food, you constantly have this food noise, to really kind of dig into the deeper underlying psychological issues is really tough, right? Because you're still focused on how am I going to resist the cake that my coworkers brought in for somebody's birthday. How are you going to really dive a little bit deeper and address that underlying psychological relationship? So what we do as Habitual, on top of just helping people access prescriptions as and when it's relevant, is really helping them hopefully change the underlying behaviors and relationship with food and then change your habits over time. And then I think there's one other interesting thing that we see medications, but to be frank, anything that helps somebody lose a significant amount of weight, there's this really amazing self reinforcing kind of effect that happens, which is that somebody who struggled with their weight for so long has basically, in many cases, never been able to see themselves as a person who exists in the world at a healthy weight, right? Because they're kind of constantly in this yo-yo sort of dieting, struggling, going to the gym, falling off track, going on holiday. Life is tough. It's so hard to do all of the things that we want to do, particularly when we have careers that we're also juggling. But what weight loss medications can do is to just make it a tiny bit easier for people to achieve that level of weight loss that they're like, oh wow, I never thought I could be this person. And then the motivation to really dig deeper to do that work becomes even greater because you're like, I always, it's a fear of loss, which is actually a fear of gain, right? You don't want to regain the weight, but all of this amazing results, all of this like increased confidence, how I show up for my family, like all of these things that I wasn't expecting, I don't want to lose those. And so it's this kind of, from a psychological perspective, it increases your sense of self-efficacy because you're like, oh gosh, I can be that person that I've always wanted to be, and I've just proven it to myself. And now let me make sure that I can sustain that in the long term, which is a really amazing kind of effect of not necessarily the medication, right? The medication's not doing it. It's just giving you the tools to be able to get to that weight and then realize that you can unlock that side of yourself, if you will.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I know we had a tech pixie who had then done our Dream Builder program, and one of her big visions was, to shift her weight and to have a, totally different version of herself out in the world. And over time, that started to happen. And one of the hardest things for her as that was happening for her, and she was changing, or her body, was every time she saw people, they would say, "Oh my gosh, you look amazing. I can't believe," and she said, it makes me really self-conscious when people say that to me,
Mhm.
because, she doesn't want it to be such a big surprise. She wanted to, and then now it's very much her norm. And,
Yeah.
and actually I was really glad she said that to me, because then when I saw her, I could talk about other things and not just focus on the progress she was making there. I mean, do you experience that with your patients, that they are making so much progress, and then actually it's the people around them that don't know what to say or how to say it, or how do you deal with that side of it? What kind of tools do you give people to deal as they've gone through the change, and then the people around them
Mhm.
are not used to the change? How do you navigate those relationships?
Yeah, it's interesting. And the people in our lives play such a role, right? Whether it's family or friends or colleagues. And, that is how we kind of build our sense of who we are in the world. So it can go both ways. On the one hand, it's kind of reinforcing to get that positive feedback and for people to tell you you look amazing. But then on the other hand, it can be quite challenging because you're like, well, wasn't I amazing before? I still am that same person, right? And so I think how we interact with people who are on a weight loss journey is also the job of everyone kind of in the world to be supportive of that and not to overly focus on, again, the number on the scale, right? The things that are exciting for people about achieving these results is very rarely the number on the scale when it comes to it. Like, that is amazing, right? But that is only the first part. It's really about what you can do in life, the career opportunities it's going to open up, like the list goes on and on and on. So I think certainly we talk a lot about how, and this is kind of agnostic of weight loss medications, just anyone on a weight loss journey, how do you basically kind of reintegrate this new version of yourself into family life, into social life, et cetera? And so there's certainly no kind of silver bullet answer to that, but we do a lot of work with our patients from a content perspective. I think we have a whole week on it still, which is how do you not just show up for yourself and figure out who you are, but then kind of help the people around you to be supportive of that and to not have it sort of backfire and then to you to feel bad and like they didn't appreciate you before. But I think, unfortunately, the reality of the society that we've lived in and the expectations that we've built, so many people are going to not really think about it and be like, you look amazing, congrats, right? And that's just kind of the reality of the world that we live in. Because, again, I mean, the data around women and career progression and obesity is a perfect example of that. There's so much that we kind of intuitively read in to how somebody looks when you glance at them, right? And that is everything from what they're wearing, but obviously obesity and excess weight is a huge piece of it that, again, it's even unconscious bias that a lot of us have built in because of the way that the media has talked about these things for so long.
Yeah, and I think the media, like you said, there's the perspective on medication has been, oh, it's a silver bullet, and you no longer need to do all the hard work. And actually, I think
Mm,
what you've built is really beautiful, because you're doing the hard work, and like you said, you're giving people the headspace. I mean, the only thing I can equate it to, really, for me, is that when I found out I had ADHD 2 years ago, and then I went on supplements to help sort of quiet my brain, that was huge, because I didn't realize
mm,
how busy my brain was. And I didn't realize how many thoughts that I had were involuntary. And then suddenly, with the right dopamine being released at the right time, my ability to control my thoughts was, just so much greater. And it completely changed things for me, and so from like, I think everyone has different things that they're dealing with on a neurological level. For me, it was ADHD. For somebody else who might be obese or overweight, that's going to play into what's going on in their brain. I am so grateful that you came today to talk about this.
Yeah,
Is there
sure.
anything else you want to make sure that people know about the work that you're doing? I mean, I'm curious why this matters to you so much. Do you have a personal connection to diabetes? What's the reason that this is so important to you?
I mean, not to diabetes necessarily. I don't think when I first started working for the company that was doing the research I mentioned that I knew the difference between type 1 and type 2 even. But what I would say, so I'm from California. I feel very fortunate, and I didn't realize when I was growing up how fortunate I was to be raised with like incredibly healthy habits, right? Was super active. I grew up in the foothills around like lakes and trees and hiking. My mom is kind of, has always been very into healthy foods way before it was cool. She was taking me to yoga classes when I was 13. Like nobody was going to yoga. It was not a cool thing. And so for me, that was kind of how I grew up. And, I think with that lens on the world, I was like, gosh, why are so many people overweight? Why do people have health issues that are linked to these lifestyle factors? And then, you kind of grow up, you explore, you see the rest of the world. And I kind of realized that the world we live in sort of fights against us, right? Everything we do makes it hard for us to be healthy. The food that's around us and easily accessible and tasty, the jobs that we do, in large part for most of us, are sedentary. So we're not moving enough, we're not sleeping enough, we're stressed. Like all of these things are very much linked together. It's not just about weight, but just health generally. And all of those things are very interlinked. And I think that people that struggle with their weight, what the medications have really kind of shown a lens on is that it is not just kind of lifestyle choice. That's really the worst narrative around obesity. And actually, there's so much biology that makes it harder for some people than others to achieve and maintain a healthy weight. And so for me, I'm lucky from both a genetic perspective, but then also an upbringing perspective. And as much as I wish that everyone could grow up like me, I'm kind of conscious that they don't. So I think for me, it's really about helping as many people as I can to access not necessarily like trees and rivers and eggs from the chickens down the road, but to access healthier habits within the constraints of the world that we live in. And that's really tough, right? So everything that we do is really to help people hopefully change their habits, even if it's incrementally, right? But there's so much that we can do and so much that we can improve with the systems and then therefore with people's kind of attitude and approach to them. So yeah, not a personal vendetta per se or kind of family history or anything, but more the way I wish that the world worked.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful, really beautiful. And as you were talking about that, I was thinking, I had a conversation with a very, very, very close friend of mine recently, and it's been a nightmare. She's been trying to get on HRT because she's definitely perimenopausal. And the doctors that she's been meeting with, they keep saying to her, well, you need to lose a little bit of weight first. And like they're basically saying to her, you don't have a healthy lifestyle, and that's why you're having all of these hot flashes and all of these other things. And she's like, no, I'm having these hot flashes because I'm, perimenopausal. But the doctor she was talking to, she was saying, well, you need to change your diet and eat better. And she's like, I'm a vegan. And she's like, I only eat, I don't eat
Yeah.
like all this, the cakes and things you think I eat, And so she was really having a hard time. And I think that it just, there is this extra layer of challenge on all levels that people are facing when they are overweight. And, we talked about it at the beginning, there's a career challenge, right? There's also, just even getting the right appropriate treatment from a doctor and, and the assumptions that people make because of the way you look. So I really love the work that you're doing. And, I'm really grateful that you came on the podcast to talk about it. And thank you as well for addressing the underlying emotional stuff. I really appreciate that, by giving someone the headspace, they then can work on the emotional side. And it's the two together that can really make a huge impact. If people want to find out more, where can they go to find out more?
Just to our website. So tryhabitual.com. It has everything you need to know.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, bye. Okay, everybody, that was amazing. I'm really grateful that Napala said yes to coming on, and even more grateful to the Tech Pixies who sent me questions to ask her. This is a sensitive topic, and I thought it was really important. It was time to address it because so many women are already fighting for jobs and careers. And if we add in perimenopause, menopause, and extra weight and all those things, there's a real uphill battle, and we need companies like Habitual out there making life better. So thank you for listening. And of course, we'll be back same time, same place next week. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.